I didn't know my life was about to collapse when my grandmother leaned toward me and asked, calmly, almost politely, "Clara, how did you spend your $3 million trust fund?" The applause around us faded into a dull roar. My smile froze. My fingers tightened around my graduation program. For a second, I wondered if I'd misheard her. $3 million? Trust fund? I had just graduated with $84,000 in student debt and less than $500 in my checking account. I hadn't slept the night before because I was calculating how long I could afford groceries after rent. I remember swallowing hard and whispering, I don't have a trust fund." That was the moment my parents went silent, and that silence told me everything. But let me go back to the beginning. The graduation ceremony was held on a bright California morning at Redwood State University. Rows of white chairs lined the lawn, parents waving phones in the air, professors adjusting their caps, graduates buzzing with relief and hope. I should have felt proud. I did feel proud. But beneath the smile, anxiety sat heavy in my chest. I was the first in my family to earn a degree in communications. I'd worked 2 part-time jobs, skipped spring breaks, and learned how to stretch instant noodles for days. I believed my parents, Daniel and Laura Winslow, when they said money was tight. Middle class. Careful, no safety net. That belief had shaped my entire adulthood. When my grandmother, Margaret Holloway, arrived, heads turned. She had that presence, tailored blazer, steady posture, eyes that seemed to read rooms in seconds. People whispered her name. In Marin County, everyone knew her. Real estate, investments, quiet power. To me, she was just my grandmother. Distant, yes. Intimidating, maybe. But family. She hugged me after the ceremony, held my face in her hands, and said she was proud. Then, as we stood near the folding tables with lemonade and cookies, she asked the question that cracked everything open. "How did you manage your trust fund during college?" she asked. I laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke. "Grandma, I think you're confusing me with someone else." She didn't smile back. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Clara, your trust was set up when you were born. $3 million? Education, health, security. You took control at 21. My heart began to pound so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "I took out loans," I said slowly. "I worked weekends. I skipped meals. I didn't have any money." Margaret turned to my parents. They didn't answer. My mother stared at the grass. My father adjusted his tie, too slowly, as if time might stretch long enough for a miracle to appear. Margaret's voice dropped. "Daniel, Laura, explain, now." My dad tried to laugh it off. "This isn't the time," he said. "We'll talk at home." "No," Margaret replied. "We'll talk right now." People nearby sensed something was wrong. Conversations softened. A few glances drifted our way. I felt exposed, small, like a child again. "I've never signed anything," I said. "I've never seen a statement. I don't even know which bank." Margaret raised her hand gently, stopping me. Her eyes never left my parents. "How long?" she asked them. "How long have you been hiding it?" My mother's voice finally broke. "We were protecting her." "From what?" Margaret snapped. "Her own future?" I realized then that my entire understanding of my life had been built on a lie. Every sacrifice, every anxious night, every time I told myself struggle was normal, that this was just how adulthood began. Margaret leaned closer to me. Her tone softened, but her words cut deeper. "Clara, if you truly didn't know, then this isn't a family misunderstanding," she said. "This is a legal violation." The word legal hit me like ice water. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw not worry, not fear for me, but fear for themselves. That was when I understood. My graduation wasn't the end of my struggle. It was the beginning of a war I never knew I was fighting. The word trust fund kept echoing in my head long after the ceremony ended. It followed me across the lawn, into the parking lot, and all the way to the quiet bench where my grandmother asked me to sit beside her. My parents hovered a few steps away, stiff and pale, as if moving closer might make things worse. Margaret didn't raise her voice. That was the terrifying part. She spoke the way people do when they already know the answer. "Clara," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "your trust was established the day you were born. It wasn't a gift. It was protection. education, healthcare, stability. Nothing more, nothing less. I stared at her, my mind racing to catch up. Then why didn't I ever see it? I asked. Why was I filling out loan applications at midnight? Why was I working weekends instead of internships? She exhaled slowly. Because someone decided you didn't need to know. I turned to my parents. Is that true? My voice shook despite my effort to keep it steady. Did you know about this the whole time? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father rubbed his forehead like he was suddenly exhausted. Margaret didn't give them time to hide. The trust agreement is explicit, she continued. Control transfers at 21. No exceptions, no discretion. The beneficiary must be informed. I was 22. That realization hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It was years of deliberate silence. So you're saying, I said slowly, that for over a year, this money was legally mine, and I never knew. Yes, Margaret said, and that is a breach of fiduciary duty. The phrase sounded cold and clinical, but I felt it land in my chest like a verdict. My father stepped forward. This is getting out of hand, he said. We can talk privately. Margaret stood up. No, you've had years of privacy. Now you have 48 hours. She turned to them fully for the first time. 48 hours to provide every statement, every transaction, every transfer connected to Clara's trust. No summaries, no excuses. I felt dizzy. Wait, I said. An audit? You mean legally? I mean exactly that, she replied. This is no longer a family discussion. It's a financial review. My mother looked at me then, really looked at me. We did what we thought was best, she said, her voice tight. You wouldn't understand. I understand debt, I snapped before I could stop myself. I understand panic. I understand waking up at 3 a.m, wondering how I'll pay rent. Silence followed. Heavy, public, unavoidable. Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to go home with them, she said quietly, and you shouldn't. That sentence changed everything. For the first time in my life, I didn't default to defending my parents. I didn't soften my words or explain their behavior. I stood up and said, I'm not leaving with you. My father's face tightened. Clara, don't make this dramatic. It's already dramatic, I replied. You just hid it better. That night, lying awake in the guest room at my grandmother's house, memories began rearranging themselves. The renovated kitchen that appeared overnight. The European trip they called a lucky deal. The new car my dad claimed was leased cheaply. I had never questioned any of it because I trusted them. Now every detail felt like a breadcrumb I'd ignored. I wasn't poor because life was hard. I was poor because someone else had been spending what was meant to protect me. By morning, the shock had hardened into something colder. Determination, maybe, or clarity. I didn't know yet what I would uncover. I didn't know how deep it went. But I knew one thing with painful certainty. My life hadn't been underfunded. It had been taken. The audit didn't begin with shouting or accusations. It began with paper. Stacks of documents spread across my grandmother's dining table, the surface disappearing beneath bank statements, transaction logs, and corporate filings. The quiet clicking of a calculator filled the room, while 2 financial analysts flipped pages with clinical precision. I sat there, hands clasped, feeling like I was watching an autopsy of my own life. Margaret's lawyer spoke first. There is a limited liability company registered 3 years ago, he said, sliding a folder toward me. It lists your parents as managing partners. I read the name. It meant nothing to me. That company, he continued, received regular transfers from the trust, labeled as advisory fees, strategic investments. My stomach tightened. Advisory fees for what? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just turned the page. What followed felt unreal. Transfers every month, sometimes every week. Large amounts, always just small enough to avoid immediate scrutiny. The analysts traced the money forward, like following blood through veins, until it led somewhere painfully familiar. A down payment on my parents' house renovation. A luxury SUV. First-class flights to Europe. Hotel charges from cities I'd never been able to afford to visit. They told me those trips were work-related, I whispered. They were, one analyst replied gently. Just not yours. More files. More numbers. A failed restaurant investment that collapsed within a year. A tech startup hemorrhaging cash. A cryptocurrency account opened at the peak of the market and drained at the bottom. Over 70% of the trust has been diverted, the lawyer said plainly. I felt lightheaded, not just because of the number, but because of the years behind it. Every skipped meal. Every apology I'd made for not being able to afford things. Every time I'd felt embarrassed for struggling, none of it had been necessary. At one point, I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the glass. Outside, the day was calm. Normal. The contrast felt cruel. They spent my future, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Margaret answered. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. They treated it like a private account. The worst part came later that afternoon. One of the analysts asked if I had ever contacted the bank directly. I hesitated. I think so, I said slowly. Around my 21st birthday. My heart started racing as I pulled up my old email account. I hadn't looked at those messages in over a year. Buried between loan confirmations and internship rejections was a short thread. I opened it. The subject line was simple: trust fund inquiry. I had written, politely, carefully, asking if there was any account associated with my name. The response from the bank was brief and definitive. There is no trust fund registered under your name. I stared at the screen. My hands began to shake. They lied to the bank, the lawyer said quietly, or instructed the bank not to disclose. I scrolled further. There it was, an internal note forwarded accidentally in a follow-up email referencing communication with my parents. My chest tightened as if someone had pulled a wire around it. They erased me, I said. No one corrected me. In that moment, the betrayal became complete. This wasn't just money taken. This was identity denied. A deliberate effort to keep me small, dependent, and uninformed. Margaret closed the folder in front of her. There is no plausible defense left, she said. This proves intent. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me hardened instead. All those years, I thought survival was my weakness. That struggling meant I wasn't doing enough. Now I understood the truth. I had been surviving despite being sabotaged. And as I sat back down at that table, surrounded by proof, one thought settled firmly in my mind. They didn't just steal my money, they stole my trust. And I was done protecting them from the consequences. The day the settlement was signed, the air in the conference room felt like ice. Every surface was polished wood, every chair aligned perfectly, yet the tension was thick enough to choke on. My parents, Daniel and Laura Winslow, sat across from me, their faces pale, eyes darting nervously between each other and the table. They knew the moment had arrived. I slid the stack of documents toward them. The agreement was clear. Acknowledge the breach of fiduciary duty, repay every cent of the trust fund that remained, and commit to a structured monthly payment over the next decade, all under strict court supervision. The penalties for default were severe. The case would immediately escalate to federal authorities. One misstep, and criminal charges would follow. Daniel tried to speak, his voice shaky. Clara, let's be reasonable. No, I interrupted, my tone sharp, controlled. Reasonable ended the moment you hid my inheritance from me. This is accountability. Laura swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the signature line. I could see the internal calculation. Comply and survive. Resist and risk complete ruin. For years, she had been the one wielding my money to preserve appearances, to buy vacations, renovations, luxury cars, and even overpriced jewelry. And now, she had no leverage left. Margaret sat beside me, calm, unyielding, like a lighthouse in a storm. Clara, you are the trustee now, not them, she said quietly, but her words carried the full weight of authority. The law is on your side. I watched my parents sign. Each pen stroke was a surrender, a confession, a step toward a humbling reality. They couldn't protest, not effectively. Every attempt to negotiate would fail. Every delay would trigger the legal consequences we had carefully outlined. The irony was delicious. Laura had spent years managing my future as if it were her own. Now she was legally bound to ensure the money she had spent on her own luxuries would flow back into my hands, and she would see it happen. Daniel's arrogance, the same arrogance that had led him to gamble portions of my inheritance on failed investments, evaporated into helplessness. He was reduced to a man watching the foundations of his life crumble in slow, relentless detail. Margaret had planned this meticulously. Beyond reclaiming the money, she wanted a statement to the local community. Daniel and Laura would be publicly known as the couple who misused their child's trust fund. Their social standing, previously bolstered by false wealth and influence, would collapse. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors would no longer see them as pillars of society. They would see the fraud. Weeks later, I learned about the height of the irony. Laura had taken a temporary job as an administrative assistant at a small medical office inside a commercial building I had acquired through my investments. She didn't know that her new employer, indirectly, was me. The office's efficiency and revenue depended heavily on her work ethic, the same precision she once applied to misusing the trust fund. Every scheduling mistake she corrected, every billing report she finalized, contributed to the financial health of an asset that now belonged, legally and operationally, to me. I remember walking past that building one morning, watching her organize files with meticulous care, oblivious to the fact that the building, the property, the very income stream she now supported was mine. It was poetic justice. The skills she had honed for decades to manipulate and mismanage wealth were now generating profit for the person she had wronged the most. Every click of her keyboard, every signed form, every completed spreadsheet was a subtle reminder that the tables had turned. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel revenge in the petty sense. Instead, I felt clarity, control. The satisfaction came not from punishment, but from balance restored. For the first time, I could watch the consequences of their actions unfold in real time, while remaining completely untouchable. Their old world of luxury built on deception had been dismantled piece by piece. My future, once stolen, was now mine to manage, with the certainty that no one could manipulate it again. This was the apex of power, the quiet assertion that justice doesn't always need fury. Sometimes it needs precision, patience, and the cold efficiency of the law in your hands. The humiliation, the surrender, the slow collapse of their social empire, it all unfolded exactly as it should. I had turned their misdeeds into an unassailable structure of accountability, and for the first time in years, I felt untouchable. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Margaret Holloway's office, the city of San Rafael stretching out below me, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over the bay. For the first time in my life, I felt the full weight and the full clarity of power. The empire my grandmother had built over decades was now mine to steward, not as an inheritance, but as a responsibility earned through vigilance, strategy, and integrity. Margaret sat beside me, frail in appearance after her recent health scare, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She didn't speak at first, just watched the skyline with a measured gaze. Then she turned to me. "Clara," she said quietly, "you've handled everything with precision. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't let anger cloud your judgment. I'm proud of that. But remember, control is not cruelty. Don't become me. Be better." I nodded, feeling the gravity of her words sink deep. Every lesson she had taught me over the past months, from analyzing corporate ledgers to auditing shell companies, had prepared me not just to reclaim what was taken, but to build a future that was unassailable. The financial restitution, the structured oversight of my parents' payments, and the strategic management of my investments were no longer acts of revenge. They were foundations of lasting stability and accountability. I walked the halls of the newly acquired properties, inspecting tenant agreements, reviewing cash flows, and confirming lease terms. Each decision I made reinforced a principle Margaret had drilled into me: transparency, discipline, and foresight. Even the irony of my mother, Laura, working as an office manager in a building I now fully owned, was not wasted. Her efficiency directly benefited the property, and yet she remained unaware that the system she now supported was under my control. I smiled quietly at the poetic symmetry. Justice didn't need theatrics. It needed structure. Every morning, I revisited the financial spreadsheets, refining projections, optimizing workflows, and ensuring that each asset was performing at its maximum potential. The Dalton Creek Medical Building became my test case, the laboratory in which I practiced lessons learned from betrayal and oversight. Tenant retention increased, cash flow stabilized, and previously failing units transformed into reliable, income-generating spaces. The empire was no longer abstract. It was tangible, functioning, and mine. I did not seek apologies. I did not demand forgiveness. The people who had betrayed me were accountable through law and oversight, not sentiment. My parents had been stripped of influence over my financial life. Their mistakes, their deception, and their hubris were rendered ineffective by the careful, deliberate structures I now controlled. The lesson was absolute. Knowledge, legal authority, and disciplined management were more potent than anger or vengeance. That evening, standing again by the window, I let the breeze from the bay wash over me. The city lights reflected in the water, mirroring the balance sheets and portfolios I now managed with confidence. Margaret's empire had been my inheritance in education and opportunity, but my reclamation of power was earned. I realized that true wealth was not measured by the millions, but by control over one's destiny and clarity of purpose. I leaned back, breathing in the quiet of the office, and allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The chaos, the betrayal, the court filings, and the months of meticulous auditing had all led to this calm certainty. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a pawn. I was the steward of my own life. To all of you following along with Clara's journey, as this story concludes, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a joyful holiday season. May you carry the lessons of resilience, clarity, and integrity into the coming year. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more incredible experiences shared by courageous young women reclaiming their lives, please like this video and subscribe. Every story brings inspiration, every journey offers insight, and every voice deserves to be heard. Clara's world had shifted from betrayal and uncertainty to mastery and empowerment, a transformation born not from vengeance, but from vigilance, law, and knowledge. Standing there, watching the lights of the city, I knew that I held the reins of my future firmly in my hands, and for the first time, I could truly breathe.